So I'm just going to go in with some of the Van Dyke brown into this bit here. So making some of those fur lines. Just starting to darken this up. Working back into the lighter area, just becoming against the direction of the fur and just bringing that back in there. I'm going to go over that with some of the dark indigo. Just shading a little bit of this down as well, and then just bringing once more those fur strokes back into the whiter, lighter section. And I'm going to use some of the dark sepia, just really darken this up a little bit more. And glaze over a tiny little bit of the mauve. And blend that into the white area a little bit as well, just so we get that nice white tone on the fur. And then we're just going to do exactly the same for this one, so going in with the Van Dyke brown. This one has a little bit more of a blue tone, so I'll be adding a little bit of the dark indigo into the white fur around this one. Going in with the dark indigo now, just shading it down through the darkest area to begin with, and then I'm just going to lightly glaze some of this around the outer edge. And then go in and use the dark sepia to add some real prominent darker lines and some darker areas. This bit fades back into this orange section, so at the moment all I'm doing is just bringing back a few of the fur strokes into this area that is kind of non-existent at the moment. And then I'm just going to do the same for this really tiny patch here. So just going in with the Van Dyke brown. This bit's pretty smooth, but I'm just going to add a little tiny bit of texture. And just go in with that dark indigo. And that's all I'm going to do for that bit at the moment. I'm going to go to the underside now and work on these small spots just here. And then we can work on darkening this bit as well. So the main spot here, again just using fur lines to sort of come over and back into this lighter section. Just filling in all of these little spots down here. And then just going in with some dark indigo. Nice dark spots there. Gonna add a tiny little bit of mauve to one or two of them, so just glazing this over like we did in the top sections. Just adding a tiny little bit in there. And going in with some dark sepia. And then we need to complete this section here. So this is quite a blue, sort of almost a lighter tone here. So I'm going to go straight into this with some of the dark indigo. And I'm just going to shade this over the top of what we've already put down here. Around the top of the eye, I'm just following the fur direction and just adding in this flick of this dark indigo colour into the outside fur. Gonna combine this with a little bit of the mauve as well. Just gonna glaze some of that mauve down in there, and then we're gonna use the white to just blend this together, and then we can start to add in this sort of lighter section just here, and also just start to darken it where required. So I'm just gonna use the white pencil and just blend it together a little bit, just to lighten this tone, so we get a nice smooth surface to work on as well, and blend it into this white section. So we've got a really nice blue section there. So I'm just going to add in this lighter section. I'm going to use some of the light flesh. I'm just going to add a light layer of this in there. Looks like a peachy tone. Just going to add a little bit of that in there. We're going to go around some of that with some of the sanguine. Just a tiny little bit of sanguine just on the edge here. I'm also going to combine that with a little bit of mauve as well. I'm going to use that white pencil just to blend that together. And then we're going to take the dark sepia and we're just going to start to darken up this area, and we're going to combine this with the dark indigo as well. So I've got a nice sharp tip on the dark sepia. I'm just shading down to begin with because this is quite a smooth surface. So I'm just using the side of the pencil and just gently shading. The side here where this sort of comes into this whiter fur, it needs to have like a little bit of an orange tinge just on the very edge here. So I'm just going to go in with some burnt ochre just on the very edge and just shade this in really lightly. And just blend it out into the fur as well. And I'm also going to take some mauve and layer that down just on the very edge there. And then I am going to use the dark sepia and just bring a few fur lines just creeping into that white fur so we get that nice transition, like so. I'm going to take the dark sepia and just add a little bit more of that blue tint just as we come down here where it's a lot lighter. And then just going to continue with the dark sepia, darken up, just pay attention to the black and white photo as well as the colour photo and just identify where the darker tones are, and that's where I'm going to add this dark sepia. And the same on this side, just identifying where the darker tones are and shading down and adding this just with the dark sepia. I don't even need to push hard on here because we've gone through with the white pencil. The surface is really nice and slick, and it just, the dark sepia just glides over this and we can get some really nice shading. Just making sure that I do pay attention to the lights and the darks. I'm just looking at that black and white reference photo. And just identifying where the real dark areas are. I'm going to use some mauve just on the edge of this lighter section here. I'm also going to use a little bit more of that sanguine just in there. Maybe even a tiny little bit more light flesh. And I'm even going to add a little bit of the cobalt blue in there as well. I'm just going to darken around the outer edges. I'm going to go in there with some of the Van Dyke brown as well. And then just go over with some dark indigo. And I'm going to transition some of this dark indigo out into this whiter fur. So I'm just going to glaze, use the side of the pencil and just glaze some of this into the fur. Just got some really nice tones going on, and just looking at that black and white photo and just making sure that everything is working together nicely. I'm going to use the dark sepia and just go over this lighter section a little bit just to tone it down. I'm pretty happy with how that's looking. Use a little bit more of the dark indigo. I'm going to use a tiny little bit of the red, the light cadmium red, and just go into this lighter section here. And I'm going to go in there and blend that out with some of the light flesh, just so we get this really sort of almost pinky red tone going on in there. I'm going to make sure that I blend this out with the dark sepia as well. So this section is where the black and white reference photo is really going to come into play for you. So now I've got a majority of that down, I'm going to go in with the brush pen, and what I'm going to do is just bring this little triangle section down a little more. So now that we've got all of this dark section in, you can see just how far we need to come down with this. So I'm just going in with the brush pen and just marking in the triangle, bringing it down and making it a little bit larger. And then just coming off to the side here as well, just darkening this. Then I'm going to take that dark sepia quickly and just work into the edges and just blend the edges out so we don't have any harsh lines. Okay. And now we've darkened that, I can just go into these sections, these sections down here, and I'm just going to increase the blue tone just by going in with some dark indigo and just layering with some dark sepia. Using some mauve just on the edge here as well. I'm going to use the white pencil just to add in tiny little bit of highlight here, so I'm going to push quite hard on this pencil just to add in that tiny little bit of whiter highlight. There's a tiny little bit of white highlight here as well, so I'm just going in with that. There we go. Okay, so we've done pretty much all of the main dark parts. So now we can get to colouring the rest and adding in the orange section. So for this we're going to put down a base layer of the ivory. We're just going to go into all of these sections that we haven't added so far and just put down this base layer. And then we're going to add a really light hint of the yellow, the light yellow ochre, and then we're just going to go in with our burnt ochre and our sanguine. And then finally we'll also go in with some burnt sienna. So we're going to use these 5 colours to do the orange section. So I'm just going to give these a quick sharpen. So we've got some nice sharp points to work with, and then we can get to the orange parts. So we're going to start off with layering the ivory. So you want to work in the direction that the fur is going in, which should be pretty easy to figure out now because we've got main parts down. So I'm just going into this area directly next to this black section. Just gently layering down that first layer and then going into this large section here. And I'm just using the side of the pencil, I'm just making some really large broad shading motions. I'm going to come right down the side down here because it's quite a dark orange and I just want to blend this dark section out into this darker orange. So we're just going to add in our base layer of the ivory down here. And then off to this side here, got a small orange section just here, so I'm going to add the ivory to that. And then this last section down here. When you're working next to your dark areas, you just want to be a little bit careful that you don't drag too much dark pigment into your lighter area, but it doesn't matter if you blend or drag a little bit through because we're going to be blending these darker sections out a little bit more as well. So just dragging a tiny little bit or working the ivory back into that darker section a little bit is just going to help with that blending process. But just don't work over it so that you create really dark smudges. Like in between these sections it's quite dark anyway, so if you do drag a little bit into your orange sections, it doesn't matter too much. Okay, so our first layer is done. Got a really nice even coating across the orange patches. Then we're going to go in with a really light layer of the light yellow ochre. So you want to use a really light pressure with this. You don't want to go in too hard. And we're just going to, I'm going to use the side of the pencil just to really limit the amount of pressure that I put through. And you just want to add the tiniest little yellow hint. So it's just ever so slightly like a creamy colour. If you're worried about doing this with this yellow and going in too heavy, then I would suggest that you pick up like a cream pencil, a bit more of a lighter yellow tone, if you're a little bit worried about overdoing it with the yellow, because you don't want to add too much yellow because then it's going to become like a yellow orange, whereas you want this to be more like a brown orange. So I'm just going in really lightly. So I'm done with that colour. Now I'm going to use a tiny little bit of the light flesh into some of these areas, mainly like where you can see a little bit more of a pinker tone showing through. And I'm just going to use this in exactly the same way, just want to use incredibly lightly, just get this hint of like a peachy tone, because combining this with the yellow creates a really sort of almost like a fleshy skin tone. It's funny that this is called light flesh, but it creates like a bit more of an orangier skin tone. Just a nice peachy tone, which will be really good undertone for some of these orange patches. So this tone is really evident on this bottom edge. So again, nice light tone. You can sort of see the creamy tone now mixed with a little bit of that light flesh, just creates a really, really lovely tone. So now we can go in with our orange colours, and this is where everything will really start coming together now. So what we're going to do, I'm going to start in this corner over here. I'm going to do this top section, or this side actually I should say, and then work on to this side, because I don't want to keep dragging this dark section into this section, otherwise it's going to make it quite muddy. So I'm just going to work on this small patch here. So I'm just going to initially shade some of the burnt ochre in here. So I'm just shading, working it into the darker sections as well, so we get that overlap. We get a nice continuity between the fur. And I'm going to work in some sanguine. So the main majority of the sanguine is going to go around these sort of darker areas where we've got a little bit more shadow. This section's quite dark up here anyway, so I'm pretty much just going to cover that whole section. I'm going to use the what one's this one called? The burnt sienna. And just add some fur strokes in here with the darker brown. And then I'm going to bring some of the dark indigo, and that's just going to create a really nice darker shadowy tone on that. There's our first orange patch. I'm just going to hype up some of the orange that's going through here. I'm going to add a little bit of that sanguine on the edge here. It's a really nice colour, this one, to add in. Here we go. So just want to continue down here now. So I'm going to do exactly the same thing. Going to go in with the burnt ochre, just shade this down pretty much all over. So just remembering to work in the fur direction as well, that's really important. You don't want to go in an opposite direction. It's just a light layer of the burnt ochre to begin with. So once I've got that nice base layer of the burnt ochre, then I'm just going to go into this area and just add a few fur lines and sort of blend in the white section into this orange section and just start to create that illusion of that fur as well. So again, just working the burnt ochre into the black sections so we get a really nice blend between the areas. I'm going to take the sanguine now and just start to get darker. It's really... So I'm just using the sanguine just to bring it into the white section a little bit. So there's a little bit of overlap. And then just going to work on adding this to pretty much a majority of this section here. So just making some fur lines just where there's lighter sections, just lightly blending, lifting the pressure off of this sanguine pencil to just bring everything together. I'm going to use that light flesh just to do a little bit of blending, especially down the very bottom edge here. Just going to blend everything together, make everything really nice and smooth and soft looking. I'm going to start to build in the real darker sections with some of the burnt sienna. So again, just going around the dark areas and just adding this darker colour down right into those darker areas, and then just bringing out the darker brown orangey tone, just lifting the pressure off the pencil as we get towards the lighter areas. This just helps to create that sort of shadow around these darker patches. This creates a really nice blend. Going to use a tiny little bit of the mauve, just coming off of some of these dark areas, right next to this white section just here, just to help it really sort of exaggerate that orange tone, because the mauve and the sanguine work really well with one another. I'm just going into some of these darker patches as well, and just adding some of that mauve. Making them a little bit more prominent. We're going to go in and just work on this edge here as well a little bit. Just adding some of this mauve into the very bottom section here. Just really lightly glazing some colour down there. You can see it just transforms the tone a little bit. I'm just going to do this pretty much all over this orange section, just to sort of transform the tone. And then I'm going to start to bring and darken up some of these darker areas. Just going to go in and use a dark sepia and just start to spread some of these darker lines into the orange section. I'm also going to use some of the dark indigo to do that as well. Just adding in some darker lines throughout the orange fur. Just adding in some shadow. I'm going to use some of the Van Dyke brown as well. I'm just going to break up this edge of this white section and just add a little bit more of the Van Dyke brown. I'm going to use the Van Dyke Brown to just darken up these orange areas in between these darker bits because it's quite dark in between there. There's a lot more sort of brown tones than you would expect that are actually present in this kind of orangey fur like this. So at the moment I'm just using the dark sepia and just going into some of these darker spots and just really darkening them up and really blending them through this section here, just trying to get this as dark as possible through here. I'm just doing that with that dark sepia, the Van Dyke Brown, and just small touches of the dark indigo here and there as well. Just grouping some of these lines a lot closer together to create these darker sections. I'm going to go over and just shade a little bit of the sanguine over this section. And I'm also going to go in there with some more mauve because that creates a really, really nice tone. I'm going to add some dark indigo fur lines to this bit here to darken it up, just give it that extra sort of, a little bit of a different tone this is. I'm just starting to add in some small details now as well, just going in and picking out some of the sort of darker lines that you can see on top of this orange fur here, and just going in and sort of improvising with a little bit of the texture. Just creating a few longer lines so you got that nice fluffy look. Okay, I'm really happy with how that is looking. Some of these areas just need to go and be pushed just a tiny little bit more. I'm just going in and adding a little bit of a mauve line just on the edge of this white section here. I'm just going in and filling in a few of these details. So I'm just using the mauve to go in and initially add some little details. And I'll go over with some dark sepia. Okay, so ready to flesh out this last section here. There's not too much orange through here, so it's not going to take too much longer. We're on the home stretch now. I'm going to start up here, just use the burnt ochre and fill in these bits here. So I'm just going to use some lines to fill in this small detail here and just bring some of the burnt ochre back into this lighter section. Going to switch to the sanguine, so it's only a small patch here, so really simple. The sanguine is a lot more of an intense colour to add down, just giving it a really nice colours in here now. Going to use a little bit of the mauve on the edge of the dark area. Just going to bring a little bit of that mauve into the white fur as well. And just add a tiny little bit of the Van Dyke brown. And then just blend out a little bit more, just lightly glazing in some of the burnt ochre. I'm just going to use the dark sepia just to add some longer fur lines coming off of that as well, and then just to also just shade in this section. So then we've got this little S-shaped one here, so we're going to go straight in with the burnt ochre. Just going to shade this down to begin with. I'm going to add a slightly stronger yellow tone just around the outer edge here as well. It's because it's slightly creamier. And just continue shading with the burnt ochre. Just going to go in and strengthen some of the light flesh tones down here as well. So next tone is the sanguine. Just starting to add in the fur lines. So short marks for the fur on this bit of the face here. And just vaguely following the direction of the fur. So just starting to intensify the tone where we've got some darker areas. I'm going to start to map those in with some of the burnt sienna. And then just blend that out into the surrounding area just by lifting the pressure off the pencil. going in with some of the Van Dyke Brown, just glazing this over, just lightly shading. And I'm just going to darken up this dark patch here. Going to add some of the dark indigo. I'm just going to shade in some of the Van Dyke Brown just to darken it up. I'm going to add some of the yellow as well, just on the very outer edge. And this last section is pretty much almost done. I don't need to add too many dark tones through this section. I'm going to blend this bit out a little bit with the white just to get rid of a little bit of that grain. Just make it really nice and smooth. Just using a little bit of that that burnt sienna. And go in with some more light flesh. Just increasing the pressure there to get that nice pink tone just on that little corner bit there. And then we're going to go in with the burnt sienna down here. Darken this up because this is really dark. We've just got a nice block of burnt sienna down there, and then I'm just going to use the burnt sienna and just create some fur lines and just taper that out. I'm going to use the dark indigo to just bring this bit down a little bit more. I'm going to use the white pencil to blend that and smooth it. I'm just going to go over with some of the Van Dyke Brown. Just shading this down, coming from the dark patch and then tapering it into this orange patch down here. I'm going to go back into that slightly orange patch with some more burnt sienna. Just going back into this section with the burnt sienna just to hype up the value a little bit more. Just bring that saturation of colour back. I'm going to use the dark indigo to just bring this tone down even more and blend it right through this burnt sienna. So I'm just using some quite gentle fur lines to just spread that through. I'm going to switch to the dark sepia and just continue this dark section. Using the dark sepia to just add a little bit of an edge and a bleed into the orange fur from this dark section. I'm going to use the red to create like a light sort of almost pinky tone. I'm just going to add a little bit of red saturation through these areas as well. So just adding a little bit of red down just creates a little bit more of that saturation, just really makes it really striking. And that's pretty much it for a majority of the shading and everything. So now all we need to do is just go back over and just adjust any of the shadows accordingly. So I'm going to take my Van Dyke Brown, I'm just going to adjust the shadows around the eye here. Just deepen them a little bit, just add any type of shading that I feel is necessary just to bring the piece together as a whole. It's pretty much there, there's just one or two places that just need hyping up a little bit. This bit's fine, I might even go in with a little bit of the black pen just here. So I'm just going to dot this down just here. Just looking at the black and white photo and just seeing where areas may need a little bit of a help along. And then just going in, blending those areas out with the dark sepia. I'm pretty happy with how that is looking, and just use a little bit of the mauve just to highlight a few areas here and there, maybe just add a real fine dusting of this through the white section maybe. Just like so. And I'm pretty happy with that. I'm actually even going to use a little bit of the cobalt blue just on this white section down here. Just like that. Maybe even just a little bit more yellow, that sort of yellowy edge. Okay, and that's pretty much it. That's our tiger eye complete. So what we need to do now is just peel off the tape around the edges and see the really nice crisp edges that we have. This is always one of the most satisfying parts of drawing, is just removing all of the tape. If I can get it peeled off of the table, just peeling it off. That one didn't quite come all the way off. So I've got some nice crisp edges now. And everything looks fantastic. What I might do is just leave this maybe a day or two, just refresh my eyes, and then come back to it when I have a new perspective on it and sort any bits out. And what we can do as well is just go in with a white gel pen and just highlight any sort of little areas that require highlighting. So any areas that aren't quite like white enough or just pushing through enough, we can just add this in. We can add a little bit of a whisker over here. Bring some of the white fur back into the dark fur at any points and just really highlight and overlap some areas that need it. You don't have to use a white gel pen, you can use anything that you want. The white gel pen is just easiest for me to use. This one's not working properly. There we go, much better. So just sorting out any highlights with this. You can even go through and use a white pencil. If you use a hard enough pressure, you can get that white pencil to work over this, but I'm pretty happy with the job that the white gel pen has done there, and I'm happy to call this piece done.